talking about FaZe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know where I was, but uh, I I don't know what's holding them back. To be honest, I don't know what is the solution because Draza is a notable upgrade over Slasher in my opinion from this season to last season. I think they were close. They were in 3 of the 4 major grand finals this season. They finished third in the other major. They finished obviously top 6 at champs, but like I don't think that they were the 6th best team. They maybe were the 4th best at this event, but for the entire season, they were probably the 2nd or 3rd best. And at times they were the best. So it's hard to say. I think, like you mentioned, FaZe had their most success against OpTic this season with this roster, and I don't think that can be discounted. At the same time, they struggled against Toronto and New York late in the season. Maybe that's a blip. Maybe that isn't something to actually uh, take and run with, and maybe you don't make your decisions based on how the end of the season finished or what happened in the last event. Or I don't know. I would love to be in those conversations. I would love to hear what those conversations are going to be like because I think they're going to be very, very interesting. And we might have just witnessed the last match that we have seen of those 3 players, aBeZy, Simp, and Celium together. It maybe we haven't. I kind of hope not, just because they are an iconic trio. But at the same time, I understand the need, or at least the feeling that you have to make a roster change after having this kind of a disappointing end to the season. Last team that we really talk about is LAT, and I think they should be given a ton of credit and a ton of congratulations for how they performed this weekend. They finished 4th, but I think there's a very good chance that, I mean, they could have won this event with the way that they played against OpTic and Toronto. They went to Game 5 with each of these 2 teams. They got reverse swept by OpTic, and they were the closest to beating OpTic in this tournament, which is pretty impressive. They were a team that I think I picked as a dark horse, but obviously, like, they're one of the only teams to really pick at that point outside of the top 4. Ghosty, he didn't get selected as an all-star, but he was very close and he played great. LAT was probably the surprise of the season. In terms of positive, I think Miami also has to be up there, so congratulations to them. But LAT to nearly beat the eventual champions, to nearly beat Toronto, who was a top 3 team the entire way. They did beat Toronto in the first round, but then obviously in the losers bracket, they lose to them in a Game 5. So really, really impressive performance from them. And the only question is, I don't know what they do now, because it does seem like if they're still committed to being a profitable business, right? That is something that we've heard from Nadeshot and the 100 Thieves guys, that they want to be profitable in their esports division. Then they really can't or shouldn't go out and try to spend a bunch of money on a free agent to bring in, like we were talking about with FaZe or Toronto, bringing in Hydra, bringing Scrappy, something like that, where it's a big splashy, but it's also a costly maneuver. I don't think that's something that LAT is going to do. At that point, how do you improve this roster then if you're kind of abiding by those salary constraints?
Yeah, I think that is definitely the biggest thing you have to keep in mind with LAT is the unlikelihood of them, unless there's just a total, like, flip the script on what we heard last year and they go out and spend big. Um, I don't expect them to, be dropping a ton of money on high profile free agents or anything this offseason. And that leaves me, the biggest question right now is Ghosty. I think, in a contract situation, he would potentially be like on a team option because he just signed with LA Thieves for this season, so they could likely retain him uh, under a cheaper salary. But I feel like just the way he performed, especially down the stretch and several times this year, he could get the bag from some of these teams, and he could be one of those guys on like one of the quote unquote not top 4 teams that maybe a top 4 team is looking to try and bring in and shake things up with. Um, So then if you're LAT and he's getting a massive monetary offer from one of these other teams, are you gonna match that, or are you gonna let him walk? And I think if they let him walk in a scenario like that, I don't think they're gonna pay him a ton, or I could be wrong there, but again, based on what you were saying with like the salary constraints and everything we've heard around the business side of 100 Thieves and whatnot, um, I wouldn't be surprised if Ghosty's on another team, but it could be a scenario where they decide to build around him, and I think that's definitely what you would want to do, just based on the way he played. Um, Saw flashes from all these guys, especially Kremp and Joe DeCease down the stretch here. So I wouldn't be surprised if they want to try to keep some of these guys around who they, in theory, have on cheaper deals. Could be a scenario where, in a world where Ghosty does move on to another team or get a big offer from another team, they might just hit challengers again and go for four challengers players and try to make some more magic happen that way. Um, so I can see a lot of things happening for LA Thieves. I think the first domino for them is going to be Ghosty, though, and whether they're able to keep him or not. I think that'll just completely, uh, shape what their roster looks like for 2025 one way or the other, and then we'll go from there.
I think you have to think about it. Obviously, a different situation, but Pred with Seattle that last season, OpTic made a big offer to Seattle to buy him out, to bring him into OpTic during the 2023 season. Seattle decided to keep him. He walked at the end of the season without winning any events, and that ended up being a bad idea for Seattle in hindsight. LAT had the chance to sell high on Ghosty, so to speak, and if he's under contract, they could have a team buy him out and bring him onto their team. If he's a free agent, that would be a bad deal for LAT because I don't think he would stay. I think he's probably going to get some big offers, and rightfully so. But yeah, that kind of does it for the actual event. Of course, we didn't talk about Miami, Seattle, LAG. I think
I'll just run real quick. I
Okay.
mean, LAG is probably the one that stands out the most. Like they're coming off a top three finish at Major Four. We were talking last episode about that being the most interesting first round matchup between LAG and OpTic, just based on the way LAG and OpTic played at Major Four for different reasons. And then that's the only 3-0 of the first round of the winners bracket. Obviously, I would say the most surprising outcome was LAT over Toronto. Um, but I certainly, if you told me OpTic was going to be LAG, yeah, I could believe it. But just based on the way both those two teams played, to have it be a 3-0 like that, I definitely wasn't expecting that out of OpTic, and obviously it was a sign of things to come. But yeah, LAG I think was just a disappointing performance out of them. They do play Toronto and OpTic, which they beat Toronto at Major Four, but they didn't win a map at Champs, and I think it's a weird spot to be in for those guys because end of the day we've talked about it enough here. A lot of people weren't even expecting him to be at Champs. A lot of them people weren't expecting him to have a top three finish at a major this year. So they had some good things. Um, but yeah, it's just somebody's got to come in top eight at Champs here, and LAG was one of them. Seattle, the other. I feel like I wasn't expecting after they dropped down to face Miami. I was expecting Seattle to beat Miami, but Miami got the job done there to get a top six placing at Champs. So a little bit of a disappointing run for Seattle at Champs. Obviously, only two matches. I just didn't expect them to be one of the first two teams eliminated, even though there's only 8 teams to choose from for that honor. But then Miami, I think top six at Champs makes sense for them. They had ups and downs this year, especially start of the year looked like they were going to be really strong in the online portion, had their struggles on land. Then they bring in Real, see some success. Middle of the pack makes a ton of sense. I think that's a positive place for them to end the season, all things considered. I think for them, priority is probably keep Real and then see what else they can do around him. Probably keep some of the other Spanish players they have under contract and um, will be interesting to see what they do with that roster there. But yeah, and I guess for Seattle, LAG, I mean, I don't know. They're not competing at the Esports World Cup. I don't think we talked about that on the podcast there. Like the 12 CDL teams got invited, and they're the 11 CDL teams are going. LAG is the only one not going. Some people
I think it's an
speculating that,
organization
like,
thing.
yeah. So will be interesting to see what happens with that roster. Wouldn't be surprised if it's blown up in some capacity, and not necessarily because of the way they performed or anything like that, but maybe some organizational changes or stuff will happen. So we'll probably talk about that more over the next couple months. And then Seattle, I think we talked about Abuza, potentially being a Rookie of the Year candidate. So Seattle's had some success with guys like Pred and Sid before, as rookie players coming in. I would imagine Seattle wants to keep Abuza and go from there. I guess to that extent too, they probably want to keep 04 at least under contract because you would assume they have him on a cheap deal. You can at least hold him as a sub at the very least. But I think 04 at least deserves a shot at being considered for a starting spot. I don't know. Depends on what they decide to do or who they're able to get.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think we'll have enough time to talk about those other teams, but would expect all those teams we didn't really talk about too in depth to make multiple changes this offseason.
Yeah, and the thing about what's different this offseason is we have the Esports World Cup, and that's only in less than a month. So we really are kind of, it's almost like another major, like a major after champs that we're kind of building to, where, usually champs would be done and we'd have, who knows, like an undetermined amount of time until we would see another CDL match. Now, or well, I guess that's still the case, but at least we'll see some competitive Call of Duty in less than a month, and we'll see some roster changes. I believe the rotation tweeted, I don't know if that's accurate, that roster lock for the Esports World Cup is the Monday after champs. So like, today when you're listening to it.
Wow.
So I mean, like rosters are going to be moving, even if we don't know them publicly. They're going to be moving really quickly, especially for those bottom 8 teams that they've had a little more time to think about what's going to happen. But yeah, I think it's going to happen really, really fast. But yeah, that we kind of ran through the teams. Obviously, we will talk more about probably each of the CDL teams as we approach the Esports World Cup, and especially if they're making roster changes, give our thoughts on that. I do quickly want to run through the All-Stars and the awards because that is something that we actually dedicated an entire episode to. So if you want to see how our predictions came out, please go back, I think, 2 episodes ago now. But All-Star teams, there were 2. The top All-Star team, Scrap, Celium, Hydra, Simp. No real surprises there. Second team, Dashy, Draza, Kleenex, and Shotzi. I think the real surprise, I guess you could say, is that OpTic didn't have a first team player, and that FaZe ended up getting 3 of their players onto the All-Star teams. Abizi was the only one left off, so that you could say that's maybe the biggest surprise in terms of that. Any overall thoughts on these 2 All-Star teams?
No, I think we went through the votes, and those are 7 of the 8 players. The only ones I didn't personally vote for was Shotzi. I voted for Abizi, and obviously in hindsight, the way Shotzi played at champs, that sounds pretty stupid right now, and I'd be looking pretty dumb. But I did say when we were going through that I wouldn't be surprised if Shotzi and Dashy both made it because of the fan vote, and I believe the CDL Twitter showed the breakdown. I'm pretty sure Shotzi was Shotzi number 1 in the fan vote. Or was he number 2 for the subs? I'm not sure. Did I link it here?
Shotzi was number 1 for fans, yes.
Yeah. So that makes a ton of sense, and that's kind of what I was saying. So I'll take getting 7 of 8 right there. But yeah, in hindsight, Shotzi made a ton of sense, especially the way he played at champs. And who knows, the teams would have maybe looked a little different. These are after champs, but these are regular season awards. So I think you and I were kind of in agreement. The team of the year, those 4 players, made a ton of sense to be the top 2 ARs and top 2 subs. And then the second team is where we were, there was kind of like a little more room for debate. Was definitely, you got it written down here, was interesting. Hydra was like the quote unquote number 1 SMG, and Simp was number 2, but then Simp ends up winning MVP still. The only thing, just based on the way the voting worked, was that would to me suggest that some people left simp off their ballots because like when we were doing it, we didn't have to rank them for all stars, right? It was just you picked four names. So if Hydra's getting more votes than simp, that would be why he would
Yeah.
be ahead of it. So, but that's just, I mean, I don't know who's filling out this stuff and not voting Simp
Yeah.
as one of the top four SMGs at all. So that's you know, I don't know how much it matters the number one versus number two SMG and all that stuff, but yeah, I think the All Star team's pretty good job of summarizing the season, especially uh, Shotzi getting in there and in the grand scheme of things after the way he performed. And I remember saying when we were doing the votes, like he was the MVP, Major Three when OpTic was at their best, and maybe you and I or just me was thinking a little bit too much recently because of their underperformance at Major Four. But
Hmm.
end of the day, I think solid All Star teams.
Yeah, and I will just say very notably, Scrappy was the only unanimous. He was like number one across the board for fans, players, coaches, GMs, and talent. So he was the only one. And then what I found interesting was on the subs, Pred was six in fans, six in players, 12 in coaches and GMs, six in talent. And then Nero was 13 in fans, and then six players, six coaches, six talent. I just thought that was interesting that like how they're valued quite differently. Obviously, Pred kind of undervalued by the coaches and GMs. Nero
Might have been
undervalued by fans.
some recent results affecting that ranking for Pred too.
Yeah,
But I know when I was looking at the stats on Breaking Point, Nero had like a
yeah,
1.06 or
like
something like
very
he had
good.
good stats. So yeah,
Rookie of the year, Gwen. Really no surprise there. That was who we both thought it would be, and we were talking about pretty much throughout the entire season,
yep.
despite some of Carolina's struggles. I'm sure Abuza was not happy with that. And then the MVP was Simp. He I think this is his second season MVP, and he's obviously just he keeps adding awards, and he's one of the greatest players of all time. How high you want to go, that is for another episode for sure. But congratulations to him. And we should mention Challengers Champs, and we did mention it, very briefly near the beginning of this very long episode. It turns out, Arcity's Paul X, Yuli, and 2 Real won Challengers Champs, and I believe it went to a seventh game, if I'm not mistaken. It like kind of backed up the schedule for Championship Sunday, which I'm sure that like the CDL was not like particularly happy about because they play it on the main stage for Challengers Champs. So things worked out. But Arcity's 2.5-time world champ now. Paul back on top. I mean, all of these guys are former CDL players. Hopefully, we'll get to see them back in the CDL at some point. Any final thoughts? I should say, pick them. I'm not gonna let it slide, but I had possibly a better comeback than OpTic did this weekend. I was trailing by 4 matches heading into this event, and we were literally tied 169 and 84 heading into Championship Sunday. I went with OpTic. Bink, unfortunately, went with the New York Subliners. Therefore, I am the Pick'em champion, which I started off really well, and then I finished off really well. So that kind of tracks. In total, I went 170 and 84. You went 169 and 85. Tremor just really far back. 0 and 1. Man, that's crazy. I think you
We'll
mentioned that we
say
were above even the talent desk in terms of Pick'em this year.
yeah. So Allie had 168 and whatever that would be
86.
86. So yeah, she picked New York to win too. So pretty sure we just narrowly beat her out. And she just narrowly beat out Nameless by a couple matches too. So pretty good runs from us. I will say though, you picked OpTic first. uh, to win champs, and I could have took the coward's way out, and I knew we were tied heading into Championship Sunday, and I was like, I could have just picked OpTic too, and we could have ended this in a tie, but that wouldn't have been any fun. So, congrats on an impressive comeback here at Champs. You got every single pick that we picked differently right almost. So you did well.
I think you mentioned I only got Toronto matches wrong.
Yep.
I picked them against New York. They lost. And I picked them obviously against LIT and whatever. Like Toronto in the first round, not a team to pick. But now I don't have to worry about that all that often. But yeah, that does it. This obviously has been a long episode. It's been compounded by internet issues. So I'm sorry if you're listening or watching and you're like, why did he cut like that? It's because my internet has been absolute crap for the past few days, and it has continued tonight. But we appreciate you listening or watching this entire season. Obviously, it has been a long season. It's been like 7 months, 8 months almost. And we've had some big breaks in between where we're kind of filling time, a lot of online matches, long stretches of online matches, which are not very fun, not very entertaining. But at least we got a incredible event to finish off the season. OpTic winning the World Championship, which makes the majority of fans pretty happy. So I think that's a good way to end the season on. But I appreciate everybody's support. We've seen the YouTube channel especially grow a lot this season. A lot of people have been commenting and subscribing, and we really, really appreciate that. Please continue to do so. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, please leave them in the YouTube comments. You can tweet at us at jbink with 2Ks, at Pres Byers, podcast stars, at Ego Chall Podcast. And we really appreciate everything that you've done to support us. And I don't think we'll be gone for too long. I don't know exactly when the next episode is. Obviously, we don't have matches right now, but we will obviously be back pretty soon because the Esports World Cup is.
I was gonna say you said roster locks tomorrow, so we might be back
next week. Like we
yeah.
might be talking about rosters. So, but obviously the best way to keep up to date is to follow the podcast feed or subscribe to the YouTube channel, something like that, to get updated on when we upload a new episode. And hopefully we'll be able to do some more off-season content, some like looser, freer. We're not tied to matches. We can talk about some of the things that we kind of put on the back burner throughout the season, like, who's the GOAT, all that kind of stuff that, we talk about for like 15 minutes and then we're like, okay, we need to speed up this episode now because we're going to be here for 2 hours if we continue to talk. So hopefully we'll get to some of that content. And if you have specific topics that you want us to talk about or bring up during the course of the off season, please let us know and we'll try to fit it in however we can. But we appreciate it. We appreciate you. Thank you guys for listening or watching, and Bink, take it away.
Yep, I'm going to try to be quick so that it doesn't get cut off by Preston's internet. But like he said, thank you guys so much for all the support this year. Definitely was a slog at time to get through some of the online portions of this season, but we made it, and it was worth it at the end of the day. Definitely was an action-packed season. Congrats to OpTic again, as you said, one of the champs of all time, and definitely one to remember. But yeah, we're not going anywhere. We'll be back if there's stuff to talk about, when there's stuff to talk about. So hope you guys enjoy, and you'll hear from us eventually. So until then,